Hello, everyone. You may be wondering what a middle-aged, heterosexual white man can bring to a debate about diversity and inclusion. And it's a fair question. I thought long and hard in the build-up to today as to whether I've ever experienced any form of prejudice or discrimination, and the truth is, I haven't. I've never encountered a glass ceiling. I've never felt excluded from the conversation in any way, and throughout my life, all doors have been open to me. I've only ever been judged on my personality, my potential, and very, very occasionally, my ability. But for my family, this hasn't always been the case. My grandparents were born in 1920 in an upland area of North Wales. Very traditional Welsh-speaking farming community, chapel every Sunday. My grandfather in particular didn't speak a word of English till he went to school. As the youngest of several brothers, there wasn't an awful lot there for him as he got older. And in 1950, he and my grandmother were looking for a chance to farm in their own right. And they heard of a place that was available to rent, still in Wales, but right on the Shropshire border. It was very run down. It had been farmed badly for a long time. The house was semi-derelict. My grandmother cried when she saw it for the first time. And consequently, none of the neighbors wanted it. But my grandfather didn't see any of that. All he saw was an opportunity for a better life for him and his young family. So they packed up their meager belongings and they moved to this prosperous, lowland and anglicised area where many of the neighbouring farming families were well established and had been there for a long time. And they expected to be welcomed. Why wouldn't they be? But they weren't. With their unfamiliar customs, their lack of disposable income, and most of all, their different language, which at that time was commonly referred to as backwards, they were looked down upon and treated as socially inferior. I was very close to my grandmother, and I used to speak to her about these things. And even into her 80s, she'd recall that time with, not only with great hurt in her eyes, but with anger and indignation, and a burning sense of injustice at being treated in that way. It stayed with her for her entire life, that feeling of being judged and looked down upon for nothing more than being from somewhere else and speaking another language, being an outsider. And that's really struck with me and instilled in me a great sense of empathy towards people in a similar situation. 70 years later, though, our family's still there. Ymro hyd, as we'd say in Welsh. And many of those neighbouring farming families who treated my grandparents with such disdain aren't. And it'd be easy to smile at that. But of course, that brings its own problems and a different kind of isolation. That area they moved to all those years ago is now very different. Smaller farms have been swallowed up by their neighbours as they've expanded to stay in business. And the historic red brick and stone barns where once families worked, laughed and loved together, now converting into houses that are inhabited by commuters. In the last few years, both post offices in our two neighbouring villages have closed. The nearest bank branches have been shut down. Bus routes have been cancelled, and the local pub has gone never to reopen. These are not the signs of a thriving and inclusive rural community. And it's a similar story in many other areas around the UK. Take a walk around the major urban centres, though, and you'll see cranes, major building works, affordable housing being built, investment. Turn on the TV or the computer and you'll hear adverts for the latest super-duper high-speed broadband with bells and whistles on being rolled out to the towns and cities around the country. How many of you in the room can't even get mobile signal in 2020 on parts of your farm, let alone get a reliable internet service or 4G? As a result of these things, many of us are feeling increasingly isolated, lonely, and left behind. We all know that mental health is a worsening issue in the farming industry. And I'd be willing to bet that 99% of the people in this room will know somebody who's been affected. 2019 was not an easy year for many of us. And being very honest, it was without a doubt the toughest year of my farming career. Serious flooding, weather-affected crops, ongoing issues with bovine TB, the difficulties of finding staff to work on our farms, and concerns around Brexit are just some of the issues that are weighing on farmers' minds. And on top of all those things, it feels like every time you open a newspaper, turn on the TV, or browse through social media, someone is blaming farmers for something. Flooding, sheep farmers' fault. Rising temperatures, beef and dairy farmers' fault. Soil degradation, arable farmers' fault. Deforestation, pig and poultry farmers' fault. Incredibly complex, nuanced global issues reduced down to a simple black and white argument of who's right, who's wrong, and who's to blame. And too often, the finger is being unjustly pointed at us as farmers and food producers, and it's taking a toll. In the eyes of some, in just a few generations, UK farmers have gone from the heroes who kept the hungry nation going during World War II to villains who are destroying the planet, poisoning our food supply, and getting rich on massive subsidies. So what's changed? Have we not told our story well enough? Do we need to be more transparent as an industry and show people that we have nothing to hide and they have nothing to fear? I'd say so. We need to communicate that farming is a cutting-edge and innovative industry that can feed the growing population whilst having a positive effect on climate change. If we're going to attract the brightest and best young talent into agriculture, we must blow away that storybook image of the simpleton old farmer leaning on a gate, chewing on a piece of straw, and show people what we really are: modern, vibrant, and increasingly diverse industry that's ready to face the great challenges of our age. Now, because you're here at this debate, I'm going to assume that you all believe that diversity in our industry is a good and positive thing. But there are those who don't. Although a minority, I think more than we perhaps care to admit as an industry and community. You only have to look at some of the comments on online farming forums and social media to see that. Some of them are pretty horrifying, actually. Casual racism, sexism, and homophobia abounds. And there are times, I'm afraid, when I've been ashamed that some of these attitudes still exist in the community and industry that I live and work in. Do these people see diversity as a threat? Do they feel slighted by it? That other people might be more talented than they are, and therefore could take what they view as their birthright? Is this part of the reason why we sometimes see a lack of diversity on boards, committees, and panels in agriculture? Well, if this is the case, that's not only short-sighted on an individual level, but also for us as an industry. We all know that in our own businesses, that an outside pair of eyes or someone with a different perspective can sometimes see things that we can't, that they can challenge us and bring fresh and exciting ideas that can push us forward and drive us to excel. This has to be the same for us collectively as an agricultural industry, and we must reflect the rapidly changing face of wider society. As a father of 4 daughters, you would not believe how often I am still asked by both men and women, "You'll keep going for the boy for the farm, will you?" And aside from the fact we're not insane, we've already got 4, in 2020, that's not only insulting to me and my children, it's genuinely ludicrous. Quite apart from the fact that an estimated 60 to 80% of the world's farmers are women, they're astronauts, scientists, engineers, frontline combat infantry, leaders of nations, and even presidents of national farmers' unions. As difficult and stressful as farming can be at times, and I'm sure that my girls can be farmers if they want to be. It's important to say that other sectors will be having these conversations around diversity and inclusion too. It's not just agriculture. But what I want, and I think that we should all strive for, is for us to be the example that others follow. So others point to us in farming and food and say, look what they're doing. What a forward-thinking, inclusive, diverse, and welcoming industry that is. A person's sex, race, sexuality, birthplace, or religion shouldn't even be a consideration to us. only their potential, personality, and ability. It is not where a person comes from, but where they're going that counts. Thank you. Just one more thing quickly. I hope during this discussion today we will bust open a few stereotypes, and we all know that one of the most stereotypical white middle-aged man things that any of us can do at a conference is to wear a pair of flamboyantly jazzy socks in a panel debate, and your eyes are immediately drawn to them. So because of that, and in the interest of smashing stereotypes, I've gone for plain grey ones.